He arrived at the marina at 4 in the morning without his wife. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the accident itself, not yet, but that specific image. Brian Hooker paddling alone through the dark water of the Abacos, reaching Marsh Harbor around 4 a.m. on April 5th, 2026. His wife Lynette had been in the water for hours by then. He reported her missing shortly after he arrived. He said she fell overboard. He said the conditions were rough, high winds, choppy seas, and she went over the side of their small dinghy near Elbow Cay. He said she was wearing the boat key around her wrist, the safety lanyard, and when she went in, the engine cut out. He said he threw a flotation device toward her. He said he last saw her swimming toward shore. He said the currents took her. He said there was nothing he could do. He said he paddled for hours in the dark. When he finally got to Marsh Harbor, alone, just before dawn, he went to the authorities and told them what happened. That's the account. That's what Brian Hooker says. The problem is that Lynette's daughter doesn't believe a word of it. The bartender who served them that night has questions about the timeline. The Royal Bahamas Police Force arrested Brian 4 days later and held him for 5 days. The U.S. Coast Guard opened a criminal investigation, and on May 10th, over a month after Lynette disappeared, federal investigators seized the sailboat Soulmate as it tried to leave the Bahamas heading for the United States. She still hasn't been found. The investigation is still open, and the record on this case is a lot more complicated than a man paddling to shore in the dark. This is what we know. She was 55 years old, a mother, a sailor. Lynette Hooker grew up in Michigan. She and Brian were from Onstead, a small town in Lenawee County, southwest of Detroit. By most accounts, she was the kind of person who found her footing on the water. She called the ocean her happy place, and she wasn't being poetic about it. She meant it in the way people mean it when something isn't just enjoyable, but necessary. The sea was where she breathed easier. She and Brian had been married for roughly 25 years. For the last decade or so, they'd built a life around sailing. Not weekend trips, actual live-aboard sailing. The kind where you leave the dock and don't come back for months. They maintained a social media presence across platforms under the name The Sailing Hookers. YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. They had followers. People who watched their videos, tracked their routes, lived vicariously through the footage of turquoise water and open horizons. Lynette was the one on camera most. Wind in her hair, sun on her shoulders. She had an openness to her, genuinely happy in videos rather than performed. People liked her. The boating community around the Abacos knew who she was, or at least knew of her. Brian was there too. In her posts, she called him her hubby. Affectionately, according to the videos, a couple who spent years in a small space on the water together, building something that looked, from the outside, like the kind of retirement dream most people only sketch in their heads. They'd been in the Bahamas since at least February 2026. The Abacos, the chain of islands running along the northeastern corner of the Bahamas, is a destination for the sailing community. Protected waters, good anchorages, a culture built around people who live on boats. It was their kind of place. Lynette posted her last TikTok on April 2nd, 2 days before she disappeared. The couple's last YouTube video, posted just before Lynette went missing, reportedly joked about the two of them getting sick of each other. That's a thing couples say when they've been stuck together in a tight space for months. It's also, in retrospect, one of those details that lands differently when you know what came next. This is where we need to be careful, because there is only one person who says he knows what happened. Brian Hooker is that person, and he has denied any wrongdoing. What follows is his account, as relayed to Bahamian police. On the evening of April 4th, 2026, Brian and Lynette Hooker had been at the Abaco Inn, a bar and restaurant on Elbow Cay, a small island accessible only by boat or ferry. They'd been drinking. Neither detail, the drinking or the late departure, is disputed. Their yacht, Soulmate, was anchored in Aunt Pat's Bay nearby, where it had been moored throughout the day. Around 7:30 in the evening, they left Hopetown by dinghy to return to the Soulmate. The dinghy is important here. It was 8 feet long, hard-bottomed, open top, not a big vessel, small enough that 2 people in it feel every wave. Brian told police that the conditions had deteriorated, high winds, choppy seas. He said Lynette went overboard from the dinghy somewhere near Elbow Cay. He said that when she went in, she was wearing the engine safety lanyard, a cord that attaches to the operator's wrist and is designed to kill the motor if the driver is thrown from the boat. It's a safety feature. The idea is that if the captain goes overboard, the boat doesn't keep going without them. The problem, according to Brian's account, is that Lynette, who was not the operator, was the one wearing it. When she fell in, the lanyard pulled free and the engine cut out. Brian says he lost power on the dinghy. He said he threw a flotation device toward her. He said he watched her swimming toward the shore. And then he says the currents carried her away and he lost sight of her. Without a working engine, he says, he attempted to paddle. The dinghy eventually drifted off on its own. Hours passed. He paddled through the dark water of the Sea of Abacos, alone, and finally reached the marina at Marsh Harbor around 4 a.m. 8 hours, roughly, from when she went overboard to when he reported her missing. He called her daughter, Karli Aylesworth, the following evening, Sunday, around 8 or 8:30 p.m., to tell her what had happened. Start with the timeline. A bartender named Ken, who works in the area and served the couple that evening, told Fox News that one specific detail doesn't add up for him. He noted that he never actually saw Lynette while the couple was at the pool bar area for around 2.5 hours. He said he was shocked when he heard about the disappearance the next day, but he was also troubled by something that didn't square with the account Brian later gave. Ken knows the area. He knows the water conditions. He said the timeline doesn't work the way Brian described it. The specifics of what Ken found inconsistent weren't spelled out in full detail in the reporting, but investigators are aware of his account. Then there's the question of the lanyard. Karli Aylesworth, Lynette's daughter, told CNN she didn't believe her mother would have been in possession of the boat keys in the first place. Lynette was an experienced sailor. She knew how a dinghy worked. You don't casually hang the engine kill switch around your wrist as a passenger. That's not how people operate boats. The question that investigators are presumably sitting with: how did the lanyard end up on Lynette? There's also the more visceral question Karli asked publicly. Why didn't Brian drop anchor and look for her? Why did he paddle away? She asked CNN directly. Why wouldn't he drop anchor and look for her? Why did he paddle the other way? Those aren't rhetorical questions, or at least they shouldn't be. Then there's the 8 hours. This is the thing I can't resolve easily. Brian Hooker says he paddled from Elbow Cay to the marina at Marsh Harbor in the dark. That's a significant distance. It's possible. But 8 hours is a long time to be on the water in rough conditions, in the dark, in a small boat with no engine, before reaching someone who could help. And if his wife was in the water, if she was swimming toward shore, as he says he watched, 8 hours without a formal report means 8 hours without organized search. 8 hours in open water, at night, in high winds, is a death sentence for most people even if the initial fall was survivable. The maritime rescue window in open water situations is measured in minutes to hours, not in the time it takes to paddle across an archipelago. Brian himself described the situation as a cascade of failures. He said neither of them was wearing a life jacket. In a phone call that was later shared publicly, Brian described the night that way, as a cascade of failures, a terrible accident in deteriorating conditions. He posted on Facebook the morning of April 8th before his arrest, saying he was heartbroken over the recent boat accident in unpredictable seas and high winds. He said he made desperate attempts to reach her. He said searching for her was his sole focus. Those are the words of a grieving husband. They are also, and these things can both be true, The words of a man whose account contains gaps that investigators cannot explain. This part matters. On Sunday evening, April 5th, roughly 8 to 8:30 p.m., Brian Hooker called Karli Aylesworth to tell her that her mother was missing. Karli described the call to CNN in detail. He said her mom was missing. He said they didn't know where she was. He said she'd been missing since the night before. He said they were going to come up to see her soon. And then, before Karli could fully absorb what she was hearing, he kept talking about something else. And then the call ended. "How do you just lose my mom?" Karli told CNN she said to herself. "I've thought about that call a lot. Not the words, but the framing. The way Karli describes it, there was a matter-of-factness to it. Matter-of-fact is the phrase she used. Your mom is missing. We don't know where she is. She's been missing since last night. We'll come see you soon." And then the topic shifted. Lynette had been in the water for at least a full day by that point, possibly closer to 24 hours when Karli got the call. And Brian's first communication to her family was a Sunday evening phone call that ended before the conversation was finished. Days later, Brian left Karli a voicemail. In it, he told her that Hopetown Search and Rescue had found a flotation device, the one he said he threw to Lynette when she went overboard. He left her a voicemail about that. Karli has not spoken to Brian since. Karli Aylesworth flew to the Bahamas on Thursday, April 10th, the day after Brian was arrested, the day after Brian flew back to the United States. Let me sit on that for a second. Brian was released from police custody on Monday the 13th. The day after, Tuesday, he got on a plane and left the Bahamas. He told his Bahamian attorney he was going to be with his mother, who was ill. His daughter, Lynette's daughter, flew in the opposite direction on Thursday to help search for her mother. Karli spent 3 hours talking with police. She has been the public voice of Lynette's family throughout this investigation. She set up a GoFundMe to support the search. She has posted consistently on social media, pushing for information, pushing for a thorough investigation. On Mother's Day, May 11th, she posted a video message. She said she was aware the Soulmate had left the Bahamas. She hadn't received any update from the Coast Guard. "It's the first Mother's Day without my mom," she said. "It's pretty hard right now to know that she's not a text away anymore. That sentence is going to stay with me." Karli has been careful in her public statements, specific rather than reckless. She's alleged things that are serious and supported by records. She has not just said she suspects Brian. She has explained why. She told NBC News she did not believe her mother would have just fallen from the boat, given how experienced a sailor and swimmer Lynette was. She described the relationship between her mother and Brian as volatile. She said they had a history of not getting along when they were drinking. And she said something to Fox News that I think is probably the most serious claim in this entire case so far. There is a history of him choking her out and threatening to throw her overboard. So, the fact that this is actually happening makes me believe there's more to the story. Brian has categorically denied those allegations. But there is a paper trail worth examining carefully. More than a decade before Lynette vanished in the Bahamas, police were called to the couple's home in Kentwood, Michigan. A 2015 police report describes a domestic violence situation. Both Brian and Lynette gave different accounts of what happened. Both accused each other of assault. The report documents that officers found Brian Hooker's nose red, swollen, and bloody, visible injuries. Lynette Hooker, according to the same report, had no visible injuries when officers arrived. Lynette told officers a different story. She said Brian had choked her and punched her once. She said her children had locked themselves in a room upstairs and she was trying to get in when the altercation occurred. Only Lynette was arrested. She spent one night in county jail. A prosecutor reviewed the case and determined there was insufficient evidence to establish who started the assault. The case was dismissed without charges. Now, I want to be precise about what that report does and does not tell us. It tells us that in February 2015, police documented a violent altercation between Brian and Lynette Hooker, in which both gave contradictory accounts. It tells us that Lynette alleged Brian choked her. It does not tell us what actually happened because prosecutors couldn't determine who started it, and the case went nowhere. What it does do is add context to Karli's statements. Karli has alleged a history. The 2015 police report is part of that history. It is a piece of paper that exists in the public record. Brian Hooker's court history also includes a 2006 acquittal on a child abuse charge. He was found not guilty. An acquittal means nothing except that prosecutors could not prove the case, which is how the system is supposed to work. I mention it because it is a public record. I am not drawing a conclusion from it. What I am saying is that there is a documented background to this relationship that complicates Brian's narrative of a couple living out their dream on the water. And I keep coming back to something Blaine Stevenson said. Stevenson is a friend of the couple, someone from the boating community who knew them. He told CBS News that he sent Brian a message directly after Lynette disappeared. He said he told Brian they trusted you with their loved one, and you didn't live up to it. That came from a friend, not from Karli, not from investigators, from someone who chose to reach out and say that. On April 8th, Wednesday, 4 days after Lynette disappeared, the Royal Bahamas Police Force took Brian Hooker into custody at approximately 7 p.m. in Marsh Harbor, Abacos. The official statement from the RBPF described him as a 59-year-old male of U.S. in nationality, taken in for questioning in connection with his wife's disappearance. His Bahamian attorney, Terrell Butler, confirmed the arrest to media. She described Brian as having cooperated with police for hours before his arrest, and then called the development shocking. She also shared something else that nobody seems to talk about much. When officers took Brian to the Soulmate, his own boat, to conduct the arrest, something happened. Butler told reporters that Brian claimed he fell overboard while being escorted onto the vessel. He was handcuffed, holding a change of clothes. He said he lost his balance, went in, and had to be rescued from the water. He injured his knee in the process. I don't know what to do with that, honestly. It's a strange detail. You're under arrest on your own boat, and you go into the water. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe the boat's deck was wet. Maybe the handcuffs threw off his balance. Or maybe it's just one more strange piece of a case that is full of strange pieces. What I can tell you is that Brian Hooker was held by Bahamian authorities for 5 days. Under Bahamian law, prosecutors must decide within a specific window whether there is sufficient evidence to charge someone. When that window closed, the prosecutor declined to file charges. Brian was released on April 13th, shortly after 8 p.m. He walked out of the Central Police Station in Grand Bahama with attorney Butler by his side. His attorney described him as very emotional and in need of time to recover. Brian didn't speak to reporters. He didn't make a statement. He walked to a car and left. The RBPF confirmed he remained a suspect in the ongoing investigation. The next day, he flew back to the United States. Let me explain something about jurisdiction here, because it matters. The Bahamas is a sovereign nation with its own police and legal system. The Royal Bahamas Police Force has primary jurisdiction over crimes in Bahamian waters, and they operate under Bahamian law, which includes specific rules about how long you can hold someone without filing charges. But Lynette Hooker is an American citizen, so is Brian, and the U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service, CGIS, is the criminal investigative arm of the Coast Guard with federal jurisdiction over crimes involving American citizens at sea. Within days of Lynette's disappearance, CGIS opened a criminal investigation, not a search and rescue mission, a criminal investigation. That means they are building a case file, conducting independent witness interviews, collecting their own evidence. The Royal Bahamas Police Force formally requested U.S. assistance early on, an interagency request that signals a level of seriousness you don't see in routine missing persons cases. On April 8th, the same day Brian was arrested, the Coast Guard spent 2 hours interviewing Karli Aylesworth. Bahamian investigators also seized electronic devices from the Soulmate under a search warrant. Those devices are under review. About a week ago, the Coast Guard Investigative Service did something unusual. They released images of a sailboat, not the Soulmate, and asked the public for help identifying it. According to a Coast Guard memo obtained by CBS News, this sailboat was moored near the Soulmate in Aunt Pat's Bay on April 4th, the day Lynette disappeared. The memo states that the owners or occupants of that vessel may have information relevant to the CGIS investigation. CGIS has launched a search to locate that boat's owner. Think about what this means. Investigators are looking for witnesses, specifically witnesses who were near the Soulmate before or around the time Lynette was reported missing. Not around the dinghy route Brian described taking later that evening, near the yacht itself, in the bay where it was anchored during the day. That suggests investigators are not just reconstructing what happened on the dinghy, they're looking at the full picture of that day. What happened before they left? Who saw what? Whether anyone witnessed anything on or near the Soulmate in the hours leading up to Lynette's disappearance. They haven't said publicly what they're looking for. Specifically, that's deliberate. But the request for a mystery sailboat's owners is the kind of move investigators make when they believe there are witnesses who don't yet know they're witnesses. This is the most recent development, and it is, to put it plainly, significant. On Friday, May 8th, the Soulmate left Marsh Harbor in the Bahamas. It was heading to the United States. On Saturday, May 10th, the U.S. Coast Guard intercepted it and took the vessel into custody. Drone footage obtained by CBS News on Monday shows the Soulmate docked at the Fort Pierce Coast Guard station in Florida, just sitting there. The vessel named Soulmate that Brian Hooker and Lynette Hooker sailed together for years, moored at a federal facility, while investigators comb through everything on it. Let me be clear about what it takes to seize a vessel in a federal criminal investigation. The Coast Guard doesn't do this casually. You don't pull a boat into a federal station because you're curious. This is an escalation, a formal, documented, legally consequential escalation. Sources briefed on the investigation told CBS News the CGIS probe has intensified in recent days. Investigators are actively conducting witness interviews, some that were scheduled in the days around the seizure. Brian Hooker's current whereabouts are not publicly known. His U.S.-based attorney, Crystal Marie Hauser, a Grand Rapids, Michigan lawyer he retained after returning to the States, was reached for comment by CBS News when the Soulmate seizure became public. She hung up the phone. No statement, no comment. Just the call ending. That's her right. Defense attorneys advise their clients not to talk. That's standard. But it is a very different posture from the early statements. The Facebook post about being heartbroken, the public declaration about searching for Lynette being his sole focus. There are a few things worth understanding about what investigators can pull from a boat like the Soulmate. Maritime AIS data, automatic identification system, broadcasts a vessel's location, speed, and heading in real time. Many private sailing vessels carry AIS transponders. If the Soulmate was transmitting on April 4th, investigators can map where that boat was, not just where Brian says it was, down to timestamps. Then there are the electronic devices seized under warrant by Bahamian police. Phones carry location data, communication records, timestamps. Carriers maintain logs of which towers a device connected to and when. Near a populated island chain like the Abacos, that data can fill in a lot of the night. And then there's the physical examination of the Soulmate itself. CGIS can now conduct that thoroughly in federal custody without time pressure, trace evidence, impact marks, anything that doesn't line up with Brian's account. These are the things investigators spend months building quietly, before anyone files a charge. What we do know is that investigators are treating this as a criminal case, not a missing person case that might have a criminal angle. The seizure of the Soulmate is the most concrete expression of that posture yet. Brian Hooker has not been charged. He is not a convicted criminal. The weight of what's been reported could create a different impression than the legal reality, and I want to be straight about that. What we have is an investigation, a serious one. Investigations end in various ways. That said, let me account for what Brian and his representatives have said publicly because it's worth examining. His initial Facebook post called it a boat accident, unpredictable seas, high winds, heartbroken, desperate attempts to reach her. Currents. That's the frame he established within days of the disappearance. His Bahamian attorney, Terrell Butler, told police her client cooperated with an hours-long interview before his arrest. She said there was no evidence to hold him after the detention period expired. She described him as emotional and in need of recovery. After returning to the United States, he retained Crystal Marie Hauser. Hauser appeared on ABC News and made a public appeal. I would ask those watching to treat him the way you would want to be treated, to give him the benefit of the doubt, to consider that not all of us, nor you, considering your own relationships, the way you speak to one another, we all handle things in different ways. That's an interesting framing. She's essentially asking the public to extend grace to how people behave in relationships, implicitly pushing back against Karli's account of the relationship as volatile. Brian's statement to the Daily Beast was brief. He categorically denies Karli's allegations. He has retained counsel and is acting on his attorney's advice not to speak further. Since then, nothing. No interviews, no social media activity. The Facebook post about being heartbroken still exists. Everything else has gone quiet. That's a communication strategy that stops the bleeding. You don't help your case by explaining yourself in public, while federal investigators are interviewing witnesses and forensic teams are going through your boat. What he hasn't explained, publicly to my knowledge, is the 8 hours, the lanyard, why Lynette was wearing it, why he paddled away from where she went in, what happened during those dark hours on the water before he reached Marsh Harbor. Maybe there are answers. If there are, they haven't been shared. The Sailing Hookers, that was the channel name, the account. Brian and Lynette documented their life at sea with genuine regularity. YouTube, Instagram, TikToks. They built a following. People cared about them. That documentation is also a data trail. The last TikTok Lynette posted was April 2nd, 2 days before she disappeared. Investigators reviewing that content can use public social media as part of a timeline reconstruction, not just narratively, but for what it reveals about locations visited, vessel condition, the state of the relationship in the days before. The comment sections became a real-time investigation. People who knew the couple, people who'd anchored near Soulmate. The boating community is small and interconnected. The CGIS request for the mystery sailboat presumably circulated through that community, which is probably how investigators learned it existed in the first place. Blaine Stevenson, the friend who told Brian directly that he didn't live up to his responsibility. He's from that community. He watched this unfold like everyone else. He felt strongly enough to send the message. The Sailing Hookers account is quiet now. The last content is the TikTok from April 2nd. The channel still exists. It just stopped. As of this video, the Soulmate is at Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station under federal custody. Brian Hooker's location is not publicly known. The mystery sailboat's owner has not been publicly identified or located. Lynette Hooker's body has not been recovered. No charges have been filed in connection with her disappearance. The CGIS investigation is active and described as intensifying. Let me say something about the difficulty of charging someone in a case like this. Disappearances at sea are among the hardest cases to prosecute. The ocean doesn't preserve evidence the way a crime scene does. Bodies may never be recovered. Witnesses may be scarce. The best forensic timeline is built from device data, AIS records, and physical evidence on a vessel, all of which can be read in multiple ways by competing experts. The cases that succeed are typically the ones where the physical evidence is internally consistent with one account and internally inconsistent with another, and where investigators can build a timeline granular enough to show what actually happened versus what someone says happened. I don't know if that's where this is going. I don't know what's on those devices. I don't know what the forensic examination of the Soulmate will find. I don't know who the mystery sailboat's owner is, or what they witnessed. What I know is that the Coast Guard seized that boat on a Saturday morning as it was leaving Bahamian waters. They didn't call ahead. They just took it. That is not the behavior of investigators winding a case down. I want to come back to Lynette's daughter. Karli Aylesworth has been in front of cameras since the beginning of this. She's done interviews with NBC, CNN, Fox News, ABC. She spent 3 hours with Bahamian police. She was with the Coast Guard for 2 hours. She flew to the Bahamas while her stepfather flew home. She's maintained a GoFundMe. She's posted updates. She's pushed, publicly and consistently, for a complete investigation. On Mother's Day, she posted a video. It's the first Mother's Day without my mom. It's pretty hard right now to know that she's not a text away anymore. Lynette Hooker is not a text away anymore. That's the sentence. What I keep thinking about is the version of Lynette that existed on those social media accounts. The woman in the wind and the light, snorkeling alongside sea turtles, pointing at the horizon, laughing at something just off camera. She built that record. She shared it. She wanted people to see that life. And the last piece of it is a TikTok from April 2nd. 2 days before she disappeared, the record stops there. Karli is trying to make sure the rest of the record of what happened and how and why, doesn't stop there too. Here's where I land. The investigation is active and appears to be moving. The seizure of the Soulmate is not a routine step in a missing persons case. It's a major evidence-gathering move. The CGIS probe is described as intensifying. Witnesses are being interviewed. Devices are under review. The question of the mystery sailboat is still open. Brian Hooker has no publicly confirmed whereabouts. No charges have been filed. Brian Hooker has not been charged with a crime. He denies any wrongdoing. He has maintained that his wife fell overboard in rough conditions and that what happened was a terrible accident. His attorneys have advised him not to speak. That is his legal right, and it is how the system works. The questions around his account are real. The 8-hour timeline, the lanyard, the direction he paddled, the phone call to Karli, the domestic violence report from 2015, Karli's specific allegations about threats that sound, in hindsight, like a rehearsal for exactly what she now believes happened. I keep coming back to the lanyard. It's the thing I can't set aside. An engine safety kill switch is worn by the operator of the boat. When the operator is thrown overboard, the motor cuts. That's the safety mechanism. The person driving the boat wears it because the boat is dangerous without a driver. You don't put it on the passenger. There is no reason to put it on the passenger, unless the story about how Lynette ended up in the water is not the right story. I don't know that. I want to be direct about that. I'm not a prosecutor. I don't have access to the evidence files. Maybe there's an explanation for the lanyard that makes sense and hasn't been made public. Maybe investigators have heard it and are deciding what to do with it. But it's the detail I keep returning to. There's a woman named Lynette Hooker who loved the ocean, who called it her happy place, who spent years building a life on the water and documenting it for the world to see. She is gone. Her body has not been found. The man who was with her that night has been arrested and released, has returned to the United States, and is not talking. The record on this case is not closed. We'll keep watching it. If you've been following this story, subscribe to the channel. We'll stay with this investigation as long as it keeps moving. And right now, it is definitely still moving. I have one question I'd leave in the comments for anyone watching. The lanyard. Why was Lynette wearing it? Is there any explanation that fits inside Brian's account? Any version of that night where it makes sense for the passenger to be wearing the engine kill switch? I genuinely want to hear if someone has a read on that, because I haven't been able to reconcile it. If you want to support the search for Lynette Hooker, Karli Aylesworth has maintained a GoFundMe since early April. The link is in the description. This investigation was presented using public records, court filings, official statements, reporting from NBC News, CBS News, CNN, Fox News, and local Michigan outlets, and verified public information. Any individual who has not been charged with a crime is presumed innocent. Analysis and opinion were identifiable as such throughout this video. Brian Hooker has not been charged and has denied any wrongdoing. This video is intended for documentary and educational purposes. It is not a legal conclusion.